Imagine being at the peak of your career, standing in a room full of your peers, seconds away from claiming the most prestigious award in cinema history, and then you destroy your legacy in one single second. Was it a moment of madness or a long simmering explosion? We all saw it, and yet none of us could believe it. Welcome to the story of the slap that shook the foundations of Hollywood. It was the 94th Academy Awards, an evening that should have been the crowning achievement of a legendary career. Chris Rock was on stage, doing what he does best. He looks over at Jada Pinkett Smith and drops a line about her shaved head, comparing her to G.I. Jane 2. At first, Will Smith is laughing, but then the camera catches Jada's face. She's clearly not amused. What happened next is burned into the collective memory of the planet. Will Smith walks onto that stage with a stride that looked almost casual, but the energy shifted instantly. The sound of the impact was so sharp that for a few seconds, everyone thought it was a bit. Surely this was a pre-planned comedy sketch, right? But then came that terrifying silence in the Dolby Theater. A silence so heavy you could almost hear the careers of publicists everywhere catching fire. The realization hit when Will sat back down and started screaming from his seat. "Keep my wife's name out your fucking mouth." The air left the room. This wasn't scripted. This was raw and deeply uncomfortable. The world watched in disbelief as the most polished man in the industry cracked wide open. To understand why this was such a nuclear event, you have to remember who Will Smith was before that night. He wasn't just an actor. He was the Fresh Prince. He was the most likable man in Hollywood, the box office king who never missed. From Men in Black to The Pursuit of Happiness, he was the guy everyone wanted to be friends with. He spent 30 years crafting an image of positivity and charm. Then, in the middle of this psychological roller coaster, just minutes after the assault, Will wins Best Actor for King Richard. Talk about a paradox. He takes the stage again, with tears streaming down his face, talking about being a vessel for love. It was surreal. Did he honestly think that speech would save him? Or was he just trying to make sense of the chaos he had just unleashed? The global shockwave was instantaneous. Within minutes, social media was breaking. Every major platform was flooded with clips of the moment within seconds. The memes started appearing, but the laughter quickly turned into serious conversations about violence, Hollywood privilege, and toxic masculinity. It felt like the entire world was watching the same 5-second loop over and over. The vibe was just strange. Why did the Academy let him stay? Why, just a couple of hours later, was he seen dancing at the Vanity Fair party as if nothing happened? There was a massive disconnect between his actions and his celebration that night that left everyone scratching their heads. Was he in denial, or just riding the adrenaline of the biggest night of his life? As the dust settled, people started to wonder, was this just about a joke? Or was there something much deeper simmering under the surface? Rumors began to swirl about years of hidden tension between Will, Jada, and Chris Rock. We had all heard about the entanglements and the public struggles of the Smith marriage, but did that play a role in this explosion? Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from, because what happened next was a freefall that no one predicted. Was it a defense of his family, or the moment the most beloved man in the world finally lost his cool? The drama was only just beginning, and the fallout was going to be massive. The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences was essentially in a state of total panic behind closed doors. You have to imagine the scene. The most prestigious night in Hollywood had just been turned into a viral brawl, and the Board of Governors was scrambling to figure out how to handle their biggest star. There were emergency meetings held at odd hours, with rumors flying that they might even strip him of his newly won Oscar. Can you imagine that? Taking away the trophy he had just cried over. Ultimately, they decided on a punishment that felt like a lifetime in Hollywood years. A 10-year ban from all Academy events. No more red carpets, no more ceremonies, and definitely no more stage time for a whole decade. It was a massive fall from grace for the man who was once the face of the Oscars. But the industry's reaction didn't stop at the board members. The comedy community was absolutely livid. Legends like Jim Carrey didn't hold back, saying he was sickened by the standing ovation Will received later that night. He even suggested that Will should have been escorted out and sued for $200 million. Amy Schumer, who was actually co-hosting the show, later described the moment as traumatizing. There was this very real fear among stand-up comics that if a megastar could just walk onto a stage and hit someone for a joke, then roast culture was officially dead. if the most famous guy in the room can't take a joke, is any stage safe anymore? It felt like the unspoken contract between the performer and the audience had been ripped to shreds in front of millions. And yet, was this really just about one joke, if we dig a little deeper? The tension between Will, Jada, and Chris Rock went back years. Do you remember the 2016 Oscars? Chris had poked fun at Jada's boycott of the ceremony back then, and it seems like those old wounds never really healed. Plus, we can't ignore the massive pressure Will was under regarding his marriage. For months, the internet had been obsessed with the entanglements, and the very awkward details of their relationship shared on Red Table Talk. Will was being memed to death as the sad husband, and many believe he was reaching a breaking point. Was he actually protecting Jada's honor, or was he just tired of being the world's punching bag and decided to punch back at the wrong person? The professional fallout was swift and brutal. Netflix immediately hit the brakes on his upcoming action film, Fast and Loose. Sony, who usually treats Will like royalty, put the highly anticipated Bad Boys 4 on the back burner. Even Apple TV Plus found themselves in a nightmare scenario. They had already spent a staggering $120 million on the slavery epic Emancipation, and suddenly their lead actor was radioactive. How do you market a prestige historical drama when your star is the most controversial person on the planet? It was a total project shutdown, and for a moment it looked like Will Smith's career was heading for a permanent deep freeze. In the midst of this firestorm, rumors began to circulate that Will had packed his bags and flown to India for a spiritual retreat. The public was skeptical, to say the least. Was he truly seeking enlightenment and looking to heal his soul? Or was this just a masterfully crafted PR strategy to lie low while the world burned his posters? People were looking for answers, but Will remained silent, leaving a massive void that was quickly filled by more speculation. Then came the Red Table Talk episodes, where Jada finally addressed the incident, but instead of the united front people expected, her comments about not needing protection and her hope that the two men could reconcile felt like a cold splash of water. It made Will's dramatic defense look even more isolated and unnecessary. Chris Rock, on the other hand, became a master of the long game. He refused to press charges and stayed mostly silent for an entire year, letting the tension build until he finally released his Netflix special, Selective Outrage. He didn't hold back, claiming that Will practiced selective outrage because he was actually mad about his wife's affair, but took it out on a comedian instead. It was a savage rebuttal that reframed the entire event for millions of viewers. Backstage rumors also started leaking out. Tales of Denzel Washington and Tyler Perry pulling Will aside to pray, while other celebrities looked on in pure disgust. Some sources even claimed Will was asked to leave the building but simply refused. The chaos behind the scenes was just as intense as what we saw on camera, and the world was hungry for the next chapter of this Hollywood tragedy. This was no longer just a slap, it was a full-scale cultural war. Finally, after months of silence and endless internet speculation, the moment everyone had been waiting for arrived: the apology video. It wasn't a polished late-night interview with Oprah or a glossy magazine spread. It was just Will sitting in a chair, wearing a simple polo, looking genuinely humbled as he addressed a camera for 5 minutes on his YouTube channel. He looked straight into the lens, sounding vulnerable. Many viewers felt his apology was sincere, noting the visible weight he was carrying in his eyes. He talked about reaching out to Chris Rock, only to be told the comedian wasn't ready to talk. Others, however, felt it was far too late, questioning why it took months to speak up. Will claimed he had been doing the work, deep diving into his own psyche to understand the trauma behind his reaction. But in the court of public opinion, the jury was still out on whether this was a true change of heart or just a calculated PR move. This created a massive, ongoing divide on social media that we still see today. The memes were relentless, but the debates were even more heated. On one side, you have the vocal defenders who argue that Will was just being a real man, protecting his wife's honor after a joke that targeted her medical condition. They see him as a flawed hero who simply reached a breaking point after years of public scrutiny. On the flip side, a huge portion of the internet sees him as a privileged, violent bully who ruined Chris Rock's big night and completely overshadowed the hard-earned accomplishments of every other winner. Which side of the fence do you land on? Is there a middle ground, or is this a situation where you're either with him or against him for good? The first real professional test of his post-slap bankability came with the release of the film Emancipation. This was supposed to be his next big Oscar play, a powerful story where Will gave an incredibly intense performance. But the timing couldn't have been more awkward. When it finally hit Apple TV+, the conversation wasn't about the film's importance. It was almost entirely about the slap. It felt like that image was burned into everyone's retinas, making it nearly impossible for many to see him as anyone other than the man who lost his cool on live TV. The movie didn't get the massive awards traction many expected, leaving critics wondering if the Fresh Prince magic had truly evaporated for good. But then, something shifted in the atmosphere. Hollywood loves a comeback story almost as much as it loves a scandal. Fast forward to the recent release of Bad Boys: Ride or Die. This was the ultimate litmus test for his career. Would people actually show up to the theater and spend their money to see a Will Smith blockbuster again? The answer was a resounding yes. The movie absolutely crushed the box office, proving that while the highbrow Academy might have banned him, the general public was still more than willing to buy a ticket to see Mike Lowrey in action. The marketing leaned heavily into his presence, and it paid off. It seems the Fresh Prince still has plenty of that old school charisma, but does a high box office score truly equal total forgiveness? Or are we just able to separate the art from the artist when there are enough explosions involved? Right now, Will Smith is navigating a new normal. He's no longer the untouchable golden boy of industry. He's a bit more weathered and polarizing, but he's certainly not a pariah anymore. He's working again and finding his footing in a world that hasn't forgotten but is slowly moving on. But what about the future? The big question remains, will he ever return to the Oscars? His 10-year ban doesn't expire until 2032. That is a long time to stay away from the world's most famous stage. Even though he can't attend in person, there are technically loopholes that could allow him to be nominated for an award. But though it's hard to imagine the Academy wanting that PR headache anytime soon. So how do we categorize Will Smith? Is he a villain who let fame go to his head? Is he a victim of the crushing pressure of being a global icon for 3 decades? Or is he just a human being who made a massive, life-altering mistake on the worst possible stage in front of the entire world? It's a complicated legacy for a man who spent 30 years building a reputation for being the most likable guy in any room. It's a roller coaster of emotions for everyone involved. What do you think? Has he done enough to earn your respect back? Or is that slap a permanent stain on his career? Drop a comment below and tell us. Keep it civil, guys. This story is far from over. And we'll definitely be watching to see what the Fresh Prince does next.